CEO of LashBack. I appreciate everybody being here on the last afternoon of the show. So, and I was going to mention that there's a pub crawl as my competition, and hopefully that won't cause the remaining audience to go running out of here. I wanted to provide a bit of background on myself and LashBack to help provide some more context on my perspective and my comments. LashBack is a leading provider of compliance services, brand protection, and marketing intelligence. We've been in existence for about 10 years. Before joining LashBack, I was the CEO of a marketing services provider that included an ad network, and I spent more than a decade as an investment banker, where my job was to be a strong advocate for my clients, but also to focus on the big picture and key value drivers, primarily in the digital marketing space. At LashBack, we collect millions of commercial emails that are sent to consumers every day. We are investing in growth and big believers in the future of digital marketing, but we also recognize that it's a rapidly changing market. The question we face is how to be the best possible partner to our clients. Where is long-term value created, and how is long-term value protected? We think there's an alignment of interests in email. The best practices will bring more dollars into the market. What's compliant is correlated to what people want to receive. What people want to receive is what is most often delivered. And ensuring compliance best protects everyone's interests. It isn't a simple formula for success, but it is meaningful, and it's too often overlooked. Before I go too much further, I did want to say that I have borrowed a number of statistics and slides from some other presentations. I've tried to attribute those as much as possible, but if I missed any attribution, I apologize in advance. And also, just to let you know, I've got probably 30 minutes or so of comments. You can certainly interrupt me with questions or ask questions at the end if you'd like. So the key questions that I wanted to try to answer in the presentation were, with all the focus on social media and other channels, how important is email anyway? Does email marketing still work? How is email changing? And then what are the key issues in both compliance and deliverability? And how are compliance and deliverability related? Oops, that didn't work well. Try it this way. So I guess, at least from my perspective, in the digital marketing arena, what people like to talk about is things like social media, search, and terms like integrated cross-channel branding. I characterize those as the Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie of digital marketing. They're the beautiful people and the things that everyone likes to talk about, versus email is sort of the Rodney Dangerfield of the space. No respect, but certainly worth conversation. Email has been called old school, quirky, antiquated, non-sexy, ineffective, and dying. And people will probably ask me, when can we get back to talking about integrated cross-channel branding? The view of email, this view of email may be in fashion, but it really couldn't be farther from the truth. So let me walk through a couple of reasons why I feel that's the case. The email market is not dead or dying. It is, in fact, huge. There are 3 billion active email accounts. 95% of all adult internet users have an email account. Nearly 3/4 of internet users have multiple email addresses. More than 90% of users between 18 and 72 check their email every day. I found a great quote from Della Quist of Alchemy Works that sort of sums it all up. Not having an email address is the digital equivalent of being homeless. Further, for all of the focus on social media, Facebook is in fact the largest email sender in the world. So email underscores everything. Let me share a couple of additional statistics to put this into context. 70% of people check their email first thing in the morning, every morning. There are 1 billion Facebook users, a number that most people know, but there are more than 3 times as many email accounts. Websites, Twitter, and Google Plus all pale by comparison. So the next question is, how about in terms of daily messages? Email dwarfs all of the rest. There are more daily emails than page views, searches, items shared, updates, and tweets combined. I think it's pretty powerful. Not surprisingly, email is the #1 use of smartphones. Email is the #1 use of tablets. And critically, I would say email is a trusted channel. It has its challenges, but people trust it more than twice as much as they trust either social media or banner ads. So I wanted to touch on some of the core dynamics in the market. Most people know that there are 4 major providers, but it's one of the dynamics that really defines the market, and it's hard to have this conversation without at least referencing it. Each of the 4, Gmail, AOL, Outlook, and Yahoo, has its own personality, and I think those are reasonably well understood. One of the critical distinctions in the market is the type of mail. Again, pretty intuitive, but it is far too easy for people to say there's commercial mail, there's personal mail, and there's spam. Or if you look at the new Gmail inbox, there's priority, there's social, and there's promotional. Those really aren't the right terms, and there's an important distinction in there. More precisely, there is personal and corporate mail. There is transactional mail, which is typically receipts and follow-up communication that is coming from one party. It's considered first-party mail. And then within commercial mail, there is spam and there is permission-based mail. The permission is the important distinction that's often overlooked. If you provided permission, you can call your email spam, you can make generalizations, you can decide you don't want it, you can get it upset, and you can report it as spam, but it's not spam. And there's a very important distinction there, obviously. Email marketing works. I think if you spend any time in and around the email market, you've seen some of these statistics. The evidence is overwhelming. Email ROI leads all channels. It influences purchases. It is growing rapidly. There is a new startup, a company called Castora, that's done some analysis that says that email use has quadrupled over the last 4 years in terms of its impact on purchases. And I also like the last statistic on here. The president can pound his fist and say that they are going to minimize commercial mail, but most of the $690 million that they raised online for the last election came through fundraising email. $690 million. It simply works. Just ask the president. So the next question is, are these statistics dated? And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that will say, things have changed in the email market. So I wanted to reference a couple of recent data points that say that's not the case. Direct marketing news from last month said that 85% of all small and medium-sized businesses plan to increase their use of email this year. Time magazine, within the last month, said 80% of retailers said they plan on spending more this year on email marketing. Sorry, it's cut off there a little bit. And my favorite one is this one from Wired. They don't say that email is competitive, and they don't say that email is doing okay. Their word choice is email is crushing Twitter and Facebook for selling stuff online. It's a great word, crushing. It really speaks to how effective email is, and if you can see that chart at all, what it shows is that over the last several years, the percentage of customers acquired via email has grown pretty dramatically and well ahead of other well-known sources like general affiliate marketing and banner ads, Facebook and Twitter. So just to go a little further into the email market, it's worth a minute to think about who and what drives the email market, and it's really relatively straightforward. There are basically 4 or 5 different constituencies that drive email. There's users, providers, senders, regulators, and litigators. Why is there a ton of spam? Because it is cheap to send, and it is very profitable. Why is it such a lightning rod for complaint? I would argue at least a significant component of it is because people view their email address as an extension of themselves. It is much more of a personal exchange than delivery of mail to your mailbox at your home. Why is so much mail reported as spam, I think, is a critical question. The reason it's most often, I think, reported as spam is because it's the easiest button to push and it's not questioned. Putting an unsubscribe button within reach would provide an infinitely better result, and something for which LashBack is a big advocate for. not many folks pause to consider the advertiser who received permission and sent an offer as agreed, but gets their delivery dropped because the consumer simply clicked spam. It isn't a very sympathetic story, but it also isn't fair to the advertiser. ISPs have very little incentive to be fair about it. Keeping consumers happy is really their sole focus. So filter changes get tougher, and trying to game the system is less and less of a business model. And as most of you know, the burden isn't simply on getting permission to send the mail, but increasingly it's to demonstrate your continued importance. The message has to be both relevant and engaging. And just to keep things interesting, Return Path recently reported that 1 out of 5 permission-based messages just randomly goes missing. I love statistics, and I put together some stats on open rates and click-through rates, primarily through Silverpop and Epsilon, over the last 3 years, just to try to parse out whether, in fact, there have been meaningful trends in delivery and open rates. I don't think you can look at this data and say that there are meaningful trends. What you can generally say is that open rates range from 20 to 30%. Silverpop, in fact, says they're declining. Epsilon, in fact, says they're increasing. Click-through rates have typically been in the 4 to 5% range, but again, no clear trend. Interestingly, along the right side of this slide, Epsilon breaks out acquisition mail. Relative to the rest of the Epsilon data, the numbers are a bit lower, but they're still in a reasonable range. So we can go nuts trying to analyze these stats, but I don't think there has been a dramatic change in the efficacy of email over the last 3 years based on some of these stats. There's another good quote from Delaquist at the bottom of this slide. People have lives. If you want 100% open rate, send 1 email to your mother. Which I liked as well. So how is email evolving? The reality is that not much stays the same, and if you don't like change, get ready for irrelevance. Also a great quote. So what's going on in email at the moment? I think that there are really 4 major trends. Inbox organization is changing the visibility of offers. That can be anything from the way that Gmail is now organizing its inbox to third-party services, but inboxes are getting much more organized to address the clutter issue. Messages have to be designed for mobile devices and mobile screens. I think everyone in this room understands that people are looking at their smartphone as well as their desktop to look at their email. Messages are becoming more optimized, and there are some cool services out there, companies like Movable Ink and Live Intent. And filters are increasingly effective in terms of limiting the messages that come into the inbox. Beyond those 4 key trends, I would say authentication is becoming much more prominent. And the switch to IPv6, which is going to create a massive increase in the number of available IPs, is likely to shift the reputation conversation more toward domains than IPs. So what are the takeaways? The good, the bad, and the ugly. Email is universal and very effective. Clutter, deliverability, and compliance are the 3 issues that I would say people are trying to work through with email. And there is a ton of spam being sent, but it's mostly and pretty effectively being blocked. So I wanted to jump from there into compliance. Some great quotes on the slide just to sort of tee up the conversation on compliance. I particularly like the one, compliance is the foundation of best practices that shapes reputation and drives profits and deliverability. It's all nicely connected together, the relationship between compliance, profits, and deliverability. As most of you know, Canspam is the headliner for email compliance. But in addition to Canspam, there's the California Business and Profession Code, which is a key component to some of the recent litigation, and puts forth additional requirements for email sent to California residents, which much email hits California residents. There are also other state-based requirements. Canada's anti-spam legislation has been grabbing a lot of headlines. It is pretty meaningful as it requires opt-in, applies to all electronic communication, with any commercial content and imposes significantly larger penalties. That all being said, there are some pretty serious headwinds impacting the Canadian legislation. It is definitely going to be delayed and most likely may be scrapped. But it certainly speaks to the intent of federal governments to, more meaningfully control spam and email. Beyond federal and state regulation, there are a number of other compliance issues to consider, ranging from industry practices and corporate policy to specific advertiser requirements. The Online Lending Association, which is abbreviated OLA, is a good example of an organization that we're involved with a bit. And they take compliance very seriously within their organization. I'll give you some specific examples of industry-specific requirements in a couple of minutes. The bottom line is that there are numerous requirements. The requirements are evolving, and there are significant penalties for non-compliance. You must monitor your partners, and you cannot delegate that responsibility to others. The FTC has spoken specifically on the issue, and I will use their exact words. You cannot contract away your legal responsibility to comply with the law, which I think is pretty meaningful because a lot of folks do tend to rely on that. So I'm just going to touch on some of the Canspam basics. They break down into content, unsubscribe, and sending and data compliance. Within content compliance, the message can't contain false or misleading header information. The subject line should be relevant and not misleading. The message must be identified as an advertisement, and it must include a valid postal address for the sender. As I presume most of you know, it's important to understand that within the FTC nomenclature, the sender is not the email publisher, but it is the party for which the goods are being advertised. So more commonly, it's the advertiser. There's a distinction there between publisher and sender. Within unsubscribe compliance, the message must include an opt-out mechanism for the sender. Unsubscribe requests must be honored within 10 business days, and there can't be suppression list abuse. And lastly, on the sending and data compliance side, that focuses on issues like messages sent through an open relay and harvested email addresses. Best practices impose higher standards for things like postal addresses and opt-outs. I think it's, again, pretty widely known that best practices would include 2 postal addresses and 2 opt-outs, one for the advertiser and one for the publisher. I'd argue that the old approach of trying to avoid opt-outs hurts mailers and deliverability. If recipients don't want the message, they're likely to complain. Let them out as easy as possible. It's the best thing for your list. They'll hurt you in the long run. In terms of some industry-specific compliance issues, we just picked a few. On the education side, employability can't be guaranteed. Sources for school statistics must be present and current. Credit reporting messages can't offer to improve consumer credit ratings. The subject line of job messages shouldn't imply guaranteed income. And lending offers shouldn't include amounts in excess of $1,000 or offer same-day credit. In the box here, and it gets a little bit cut off, I made a reference to grant offers. Grant offers are an interesting, I think, dynamic that underlie an awful lot of different offers. They can be used to promote education, job, business opportunities, funding, all sorts of things. The FTC is all over grant offers. They are generally considered to be misleading, definitely a hot button for enforcement action. And in May, just as one example, as I cite there, the FTC began mailing $1.7 million in refunds associated with a single grant offer. So what's the impact of noncompliance? Every email violation can generate a fine of up to $16,000 under Canspam. It's a pretty meaningful number. There have been many recent examples of prosecutions and fines based on Canspam and other requirements. Importantly, many of these have included personal liability for the owners and decision makers of the businesses. So they are not messing around. I would argue that the exposure for noncompliance goes well beyond that. There are risks from litigators like Dan Balsam, who many of you know, corporate plaintiffs like Zuba, who recently won a $1.6 million Canspam judgment. And there are individuals that claim harm and seek restitution and threaten lawsuits. Mostly nuisance matters, but we see them on a pretty regular basis. Circling back on an earlier point, the statement, "I got the lead from a lead aggregator," isn't a defense and does not absolve your liability. It could be a viable education lead, but if it was originated with a misleading grant email, there is still major compliant exposure for all parties involved. Any questions so far? Okay. One of the things I really wanted to point out, because we can talk about compliance and some of the challenges all morning long, is that aggressive does not equal non-compliant. Compliant messages do not have to be weak and ineffective messages. The messages need to have a strong call to action. They simply can't mislead the consumer. Subject lines that are compliant and effective, and I've just got two examples that I picked out of some emails that we've seen recently, things like free credit scores with enrollment and financial aid is available for those who qualify, are things that tend to work well, and they are fully compliant subject lines. Going one step further, personalization and geolocation used in subject lines is also not a violation of Canspam. So subject lines like, "Bob, you may qualify for financial aid," or "Philadelphia area auto coverage" are also compelling, aggressive, calls to action that are compliant as well. So anyway, the takeaway, as I said at the bottom there, is that commitment to compliance doesn't mean that messages can't be strong and aggressive. They have to be strong and aggressive or they don't work. So deliverability, I've got some quotes there on deliverability. I guess the initial takeaway really is if, without deliverability, there really isn't much to talk about. I started out with a couple of the myths that people talk about, and I borrowed this really from a posting by the head of deliverability for Cheetah Mail. Some of the things he references, deliverability is all about who you know. I can't use certain words in my emails. Deliverability is a black art. And deliverability folks are always working for the other team. None of those things are true. So what really does determine deliverability? It breaks down into a couple of core components: reputation, engagement, and authentication. Reputation is a function of complaints. So is the message unrecognized and unwanted? Unsubscribes, does it function properly? Bad addresses, including invalid addresses, bounces, spam trap hits. Sending infrastructure, so the sending IP, whitelist, blacklist, that sort of thing. And then sending stability, which is what is the size, volume, frequency, and timing of messages sent. Those are the key components of reputation. Beyond that, it comes down to engagement, which is really the consumer's likelihood of interacting with the message. It's a function of the right message sent at the right time. Authentication is increasingly important and includes DMARC, SPF, and DKIM. Hopefully you're somewhat familiar with those protocols. I'm not going to go into those in detail today. I found an interesting summary of approaches to delivery by ISP, and I wanted to highlight that for you. There's not a lot of information, not surprisingly, on Gmail. Very few email marketers have a lot of success with Gmail, especially now with their new folders in place, and they don't provide much visibility and let very little mail into the inbox. But the other three, Yahoo, Outlook, and AOL, very consistent with what we just talked about in terms of deliverability, use a combination of proprietary filters, third-party services, and whitelists, along with different authentication requirements. So what are the trends in deliverability? The vast majority of commercial messages are spam and blocked. There are two different sources that I referenced on the slide. They basically estimate 70 to 80% of all messages sent are spam. Of permission-based email during the first half of the year, according to Return Path, only 78% was delivered, with the rest blocked, missing, or sent to the spam folder. That is a global percentage, though, and the actual U.S. percentage is 86%, so it's a little more encouraging on the U.S. basis. What we are hearing and seeing in the marketplace is that publishers that are sending higher volumes of acquisition mail are having challenges with deliverability. Filters are increasingly changing, complex and tight. But that's just anecdotal. So what are the links between compliance and deliverability? Most significantly, both deliverability and compliance are about the quality and the perception of the message. A message that isn't misleading, it has a relevant subject line, it contains clear postal and opt-out addresses, is likely to be compliant, result in fewer complaints, and it's likely to be delivered. Conversely, an email message that doesn't contain those elements are significantly more likely to be dismissed by the consumer and treated as spam and negatively impact deliverability. So ensuring that the messages you send or those sent on your behalf are compliant will not only protect your interests in terms of Canspam and all these various litigation risks, but they will also help to improve your deliverability. A great example of this, I thought, was there was a presentation delivered in February of last year at MOG called Case for Compliance, in which iContact talked about all of the measures that they took to recommit themselves to compliance best practices. It was a pretty significant undertaking for iContact, but was enormously successful. The phrases that they used that I appreciated were their renewed focus on compliance helped to turn the ship around and dodge a bullet for them. So I would say that they would offer that there was a direct relationship between those efforts and their improved profitability. Unsubscribes. One particular component of emails worth emphasizing is the unsubscribe mechanism. It is especially important in terms of compliance and deliverability. I'm sure that you've experienced this personally, but the absence of a simple, trusted mechanism is a major reason to simply report a message as spam, which has a major impact on reputation and thus deliverability. Further, if the unsubscribe request isn't honored, it will impact blacklisting and potentially being blocked by the email provider. At LashBack, we have had plenty of conversations with some of the major ISPs about handling unsafe unsubscribe links. So it is a real concern. So to wrap it up, email marketing remains a huge opportunity with solid returns, but it has to be done smartly and by someone that is paying attention to how the market's changing. It's clear to everyone that success comes from delivering a message that is acted upon. But while no one would debate the importance and relationship between deliverability and engagement, a similar relationship exists with compliance that's often overlooked. In today's market, what makes it to the inbox and what a consumer wants are increasingly tightly connected. Consumers expect quality ads that are compliant and ignore or report those that aren't. A successful campaign has got to check all of the boxes. That is not just engagement and reputation, but it's also authentication and compliance. And that is all that I had. Are there any questions? I'll take that as a no.
I have a question.
Okay. Can you possibly walk up to the microphone?
Yeah. Hi, I actually have a couple of questions if you don't
Sure,
mind.
no problem.
Number one, for the from address, does that need to be a viable email? Does a consumer need to be able to respond to the from address, or does it not need to be misleading for Canspam?
For Canspam, I believe it can't be misleading.
But
Sam?
it doesn't need to be an active monitored email address.
I think that's correct.
Okay, and can individuals sue under Canspam?
Individuals cannot sue under Canspam.
Okay.
They can certainly threaten,
Mhm.
but they can't sue under Canspam.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Okay. If anyone has any questions, feel free to step up.
Is there any way if someone does not have an unsubscribe on an email that you did not subscribe to, there's not much you can do about it, right? I mean, I don't want to,
If there is no unsubscribe mechanism in an email that you are trying to unsubscribe from,
yeah.
yes, you have a few options.
Oh,
Report it as spam.
and who do you, is there a URL that you go to report that, or?
Well, you can just handle it through your email provider.
Oh, yeah, I usually mark it as spam, and then I can go through that process.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.